How American national identity changed from the 1840s to the victory in World War II. By 1840, America was clearly divided east and west, with the tension-filled issue of slavery slowly dividing the country into the Union North and the Dixie South. The Southerners saw themselves as an agrarian society, prosperous due to the cash crops of tobacco, cotton, and most importantly, slave labor, exploited for the massive plantation systems, one of the major characteristics that the Southerners believed set their identity apart from the rest of the nation. Slavery was another practice that the South associated themselves with, causing tension with the rest of the nation that escalated after the introduction of popular sovereignty and abolition. The South Dixie fought valiantly, but after 4 long years of gruesome battle, the defeated South conceded, bringing an end to the destructive Civil War. The North's attempts at Reconstruction, including the 5 military zone policy, only created stronger Southern nationalism, whose supporters turned to sharecropping rather than the North in the era of Reconstruction. Sharecropping was no better than slavery, for it continued to exploit the labor of the Southerners for production of the cash crops, forcing the South to remain agrarian and thus retain the beliefs and principles of slavery and an agricultural identity. At the same time, many of the recently freed slaves fled north in the Great Migration, for the North was rapidly industrializing, slowly shifting their view from agricultural to industrial, identifying themselves as workers and laborers rather than farmers. This industrialization quickly spread west during Reconstruction, following Manifest Destiny and creating pioneers, who were promised land by the government via the Homestead Act of 1962. This effectively annihilated the remaining Native Americans as the West shifted from a territory of savagery and wilderness to the American dream. In the process, the Western settlers came to identify themselves more as industrial workers rather than farmers, with the development of railroads and modern technologies such as the reaper and plow only enhancing the progressive beliefs and smoothing the transition. By World War I, the West was nationally considered to be an industrial region, continuing to develop their profitable industries throughout the Great Depression and World War II. This rapid development was facilitated by mass migration, primarily from China and Japan, whose immigrants settled throughout the more accepting West, bringing with them their native cultures and beliefs. The government quickly became fearful of these immigrants and passed the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, which banned Chinese immigration, and the World War II hysteria regarding Japanese loyalty led to the government forcibly removing over 100,000 U.S. citizens of Japanese descent, placing them in internment camps in order to ensure their loyalty to the USA. Impacting American identity through assimilation of foreigners into existing American culture, leading to diversity in every aspect of America, such as not being all white or all Christian. However, America seemed to become more Christian during this era due to the Second Great Awakening of the 1800s, a religious revitalization led by ministers and Mormons in an attempt to challenge the continuing influx of religious diversity. Mormonism drastically increased in the nation, while ministers preached that it was an individual's choice in salvation and that freedom was internal, only being achieved when a strong connection to God had been made, while stressing perfectionism, the belief that no one was perfect. Although the Great Awakening didn't drastically cause an identity shift, it did introduce the advocacy of abolition and temperance, eventually leading to prohibition and the Women's Christian Temperance League in the 1920s. But more importantly, both movements used Christian values as part of their justification and brought women to the forefront of society. In the mid-1800s, women were considered to be the dutiful housewife, responsible for housework and rearing children, while being subservient to their husbands. Yet as the issue of slavery grew, women took an active role campaigning for abolition across the nation, the first time we see women take an interest and gain some power in national conflicts. The need for the advocacy of equality quickly led women to strongly advocate for temperance and prohibition. The mere suggestion of banning alcohol caused controversy within homes and families, as women began to change who they were and what they stood for. Groups were formed, including the Women's Christian Temperance League, and although the women did not succeed in their call for national prohibition until the 1920s, the temperance movement itself began in the 1840s, its principles leading to the success of women in the 1920s and suffrage. The 1920s were the turning point for women, as the Jazz Age allowed shorter skirts, nightclubs, flappers, and a sense of freedom and independence for women, the young generation especially. Gender equality had also been gained at the national level, as the 19th Amendment was passed by Congress in 1920, giving women the right to vote and opening up the door to working and laboring outside the home at the turn of the century, independent, free, and treated as equals. Women gained the mindset in the late 1800s that they could accomplish anything, such as working in factories, financially supporting themselves, and banding together to form the Women's Trade Union, which advocated for labor rights. Working women only increased during World War I, but really made their mark on history during World War II, taking on the typical male jobs that had been vacated by the departing soldiers. Jobs such as assembling fighter planes, nursing wounded soldiers, and running businesses were popular, with the home front going as far as allowing women to play baseball. By the end of World War II, suffrage and working-class jobs had caused the identity of women to shift at a national level, from an 1800s subservient housewife to a gender-equal, independent, and free 1900s woman. But women were only a part of the higher class system, which at the mid-1800s was strictly hierarchical, clearly divided by social status and wealth, with the poor at the bottom and the robber barons at the top. However, the Industrial Revolution and massive urbanization in the late 1800s forever changed the class system, as the Great Migration and abolition of slavery caused the middle class to dramatically expand, allowing them to gain a foothold in society and close the gap between the profiteers and the laborers. The rapidly growing middle class inevitably gained power, as they were the workers who held up the entire nation. Most notably, the workers formed labor unions that demanded basic labor rights such as minimum wage, 8-hour workdays, and child labor laws. Although violent protests did erupt in some parts of the country, the unions were supported by many of the progressive presidents, including Teddy Roosevelt. Yet not everyone in America was in full support of the labor unions, most specifically the Populist Party. The Populist Party was the People's Party, representing the slightly forgotten farmers of the West and South. It argued that American economics favored the developed East, calling for dramatic changes such as unlimited coinage of silver, graduated income tax, and nationalized railroads. The party was a clear indication of a class divide, yet the government did not entirely ignore the party platform at the turn of the century, thereby slowly bringing together two opposing American national identities. The class system continued to crumble as the stock market crash of 1929 and the following Great Depression brought down the wealthiest Americans, leveling out the playing field as the upper class merged with the middle class. Still, nationwide, Americans were evicted from their homes and lost their jobs, forcing mass migration throughout the country, especially westward. For the first time, all Americans felt the impact of the Depression, and inevitably it affected the American identity, for the American dream of prosperity and stability had failed. A workforce that employed young males to build government-funded projects needed by the nation, such as national parks and highways. Just as America was triumphing over the Depression, disaster struck again at Pearl Harbor, signaling the entrance of America into World War II. Not surprisingly, women took the jobs vacated by the males as European immigration increased and Japanese were interned. And once again, the class divisions faded as the identity of the American population shifted from a social status and class based on wealth to a unified nation, accepting, encompassing, and assimilating diverse world cultures, ethnicities, and races. National identity based off of key ideals of the American dream, the opportunity for jobs, working labor, and more importantly, economic prosperity.